I've been encountering so many students and clients lately who are having discomfort, pain, stiffness, weakness in the front of their hips. This is typically the area that we would refer to as the hip flexors, even though, as you know from consuming my content in the past, it's always more complicated than just the biological tissues. So I wanted to provide a practice of attending to the front of the hip. We will engage in some mobility practices and some awareness practices to hopefully help you find a little bit more compliance and comfort in the pelvis so that you can do all the movements that you need throughout the day and feel really comfortable and confident. So all I need for you to have is something soft to rest your head on. This thing should not be too thick. You could do your practice, by the way, on a yoga mat on the floor, or you could even do this practice right in your bed, like right when you wake up, if you'd like. So I'll have you come down to lay with your head on that softer surface, whether it's your pillow or it's a nice blanket. And since we have just a short abbreviated practice here, I'm going to have you start with your feet wide. Step your feet wide so you're standing on the soles, and let those two knees just fall together. Your hands just rest wherever they're comfortable. And we'll take a few breaths in to establish our presence in the physical body. And these next couple of breaths, I'd like for you to send them directly into the front of the pelvis, where your pelvis becomes your thighs, okay? So you're going to breathe into that area. Maybe your hands will rest there so you have somewhere to go with the breath. And then you're also going to breathe out of the area. So breathing into the front of the pelvis or the hands if they're resting there. And breathing out of the front of the pelvis. Very good. And then I'll have you bring those two knees apart and drop both of them over to the right, like the windshield wiper. Reach your arms out nice and wide now. Yeah, nice and wide. And then bring your two knees back up, straight up to the center. Still with your feet as wide as your mat. Now I'm going to change it up a little bit. So send your right heel all the way out long. So it just kind of slid down the long edge of your mat. And then as you windshield wiper back over to the right, draw the right heel up the length of the mat again, so both knees return to the windshield wiper. We just got there a little bit different than usual, right? And then you're going to come back with the left knee to the center of the right heel. You send out long on the mat. And then as you windshield wiper the left thigh to the right, your right knee slides back up, heel along that long edge. Let's do a few more of those. It's sliding up and down the long edge of the mat with that right heel. And your hips and your left thigh, believe that they're just doing a regular old windshield wiper. There's nothing different about this from the perspective of the hips and the left thigh. Now for these last two here, before I change it up, I'd like for you to maybe be a little bit more intentional about drawing that right knee up towards your right elbow, like a little squeeze there. And then send the leg back out long. Let's do one more just like that. Okay. And then this time with your left knee pointed up and your right leg out long, I'm going to have you stay on your back. But now let's bring that right knee out, sliding the heel up the long edge and then sliding it out long. So now we're keeping the hips relatively steady. We're not tilting, but we're doing the same action with the right leg, but we did make it a little bit harder, didn't we? Made it a little more challenging. You might find that your hips are tilting slightly to the right. That's normal. and that's to be encouraged, but it's nothing like the windshield wiper we did before. Let's do 3 more of those. And you might be starting to feel a little warm or even some fatigue in the front of your right hip, right in the crease there almost. Although the hip flexors certainly do span a wider, greater area than just that hip crease. Okay, last one. You're going to pull that right knee up and then go ahead and windshield wiper the left knee again and take a couple of breaths in the windshield wiper here. Good. And maybe you got a little burn in the front of that right hip a little bit. That's not a bad thing. When we come back to the center. And once again, the heels are standing as wide as your mat with the feet flat on the floor. We'll windshield wiper both knees, this time over to the left. And then you'll bring both knees back up to the center. Okay, let's keep the right knee as it is, but slide your left heel down the long edge of your mat till that left leg is fully extended. And this time, as you tilt your hips to the left, draw your left knee up. Your heels slide up alongside the long edge and then down back toward the front of the mat there. Back onto your back with the left knee pointed up, and then windshield wiper back over to the left, drawing that left knee up towards your elbow. Let's do 3 more like this, and you get to tilt your hips as much as you want for this, which does seem to help, right? It makes it a little easier. So I just want to get you a little bit more comfortable with the skill, and then I'll make it harder here after the next repetition. Okay, here's the last one like this, and then we get to really practice now that we've got it. Okay, so this time, right knee stays pointed up. Hips are only going to tilt just a little bit as your left heel slides up the long edge, pulling that knee towards your armpit, and then slide the leg back out long. If you can keep the foot just sliding rather than lifting, I think that would be my preference. And you may find that your hips have to tilt more here than they did on the first side, or maybe less. Let's do a few more till you start to feel that warmth in the hip crease. And know that that warmth, although maybe not as perceivable, is certainly within the pelvis itself, or maybe even toward the front of the thigh. So these are all areas where our hip flexors are present. Okay, this will be the last one. So you're going to pull that left knee towards your left elbow. Let your right knee drop as well. So you're going to hang out on the windshield wipers. And maybe you're feeling that hold still in the front of the left hip. You're feeling your hip flexors still engaged. That's good. That's what we want. Often when we think of mobility, we think of stretching, but mobility is actually the combination of 2 things. That would be your range of motion and your strength. Both of these are required for mobility. All right, and then we're going to come back with the 2 knees. Feet are still standing wide on your mat. Hips are centered now. And walk your feet in until they're about hips width. Let your arms just rest by your sides with your palms face down. And we're going to take some bridge pose. We're going to repeat it quite a few times in this short mobility drill. So you're going to bring the weight of the feet, really push down into the feet, and then lift your hips up, push down, down, down with your feet. And as you come up, shrug your shoulders one at a time under you a little bit more so that your shoulder blades are almost squeezed together, and you can push with your feet more and roll more onto the bridge of the shoulders. Yes. And then you're going to come back down. Shoulder blades are still kind of pinched together. That's perfect. And then you're going to push back up, push down into your feet. And then you come back down. So as you push up, you may notice that you feel a little stretch in your hip flexors. Think about, could I make sure there's no more crease here, that I'm fully extended with my hip? And then you come down. And maybe you can't today, right? Maybe it's a little too tight in the front of the hip to really get to that full extension, but you can still work toward that. And I'll tell you how. So by pushing down into your feet and squeezing your glutes a little bit, those are the extensors of your hip. Those glutes help you to extend your hip. And so that's how we get a little bit more range of motion in the front of the hip, right? It's not just by stretching the hip flexors, it's by strengthening the hip extensors. Let's do 2 more. And again, if you're finding that it's getting a little warm, maybe you're feeling a little burn, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's necessary. This is your last one. You're going to come up, squeeze, and come back down, and then just rest for a moment and feel all that nice warmth in the lower body now. Take a couple of breaths. Maybe you'll even place your hands once again on those hip creases or the front of the pelvis. And as you breathe in, you'll breathe into those hands. And as you breathe out, you'll breathe out from that place as well. Giving your pelvis the benefit of your attention. I read a quote recently that the sincerest and kindest form of generosity is to give one's attention. Okay. Now I'll have you keep your left foot flat, but you're going to send your right leg out long. It doesn't have to be wide this time. And your arms just resting out to the sides, just keeping them out of the way now. And keeping your knees soft, lift up this right leg and bring it up about as high as you're comfortable. I don't want you to really work hard on this, like, get that leg in. This isn't that kind of thing, okay? Just chill, bring the leg up and then bring it back down. This is actually what's important here. And when your leg feels its heaviest, pause. And then let your heel come all the way down, right? Because we could hang out in a place where the leg is sort of heavy. I want it to be at its heaviest. So go ahead and bring the leg back up. Let's not strain for this. This is not the important part. And then as the leg comes back down, when you feel it get its heaviest, hold. And then come back down. Yes. Come up all the way to that place where you're not feeling a lot of stretch yet, but actually your leg almost is weightless in a way. And then we come forward until the leg feels its heaviest. Pause. Note where that spot is in space. Yes, good. With your heel down, reach your left arm up overhead. Up overhead. And then we're only going to bring the leg up as high as its heaviest point, and the left arm will also rise away from the floor to its heaviest point. Yeah. And then we're going to bring both back down. Okay, lift up the leg and the arm to their heaviest points. And then come back down. And you might be like, why do I have to go to the heaviest point? It's hard. Yes, I know. But we're not using weights here. We're not using external resistance. It turns out for what we're trying to do today, just body weight is enough because you're already probably starting to feel a little heat in the front of the hip. And we'll take 3 more, and you will give your benevolent, very generous attention to that whole hip flexor region, which actually begins in the lumbar spine and extends all the way down to the lower leg bone, right? All of these areas are associated with the flexing of your hip. Let's do 2 more. Hopefully starting to feel a little warm. That's my goal anyway. Here's the last one. Hold at the heaviest point. You can do it. You can do it. And then pull that right knee into your chest. Bring it all the way in. all the way into your chest. And use your hands just to guide the right knee side to side. If the hips rock too, wonderful. Okay, so bring that knee back into the center and use your hands just to gently draw it in towards your chest. By the way, if holding the shin is a little much on your knee, you can hold your thigh. Hold your thigh and draw that leg in to the point where you feel like that's about the most you can do comfortably. Yes. And then let's see, if you release one hand from the leg, can you use your hip flexors to continue to hold the leg in place? What if you release two hands? Can you hold nice and tight on those hip flexors? And I know it's really hard. It almost feels like it wants to cramp, right? Anything in that short range is just really hard. One more breath. You can do it. Heel toe your left foot over to the left just a little bit. Cross your right ankle over your left thigh. And then drop this figure four shape over to the left. Reach your right arm out to the right. And then if you can, if your arm length will allow, hold your right ankle with your left hand. Yeah, good. And then that's going to let you push your right hip back and down, which is going to be a really lovely stretch for everything we've been working with. So often after we do these mobility routines, especially if we do them regularly, we find that we feel a little better. People say, oh, I feel stretched out, I feel looser. It's not in the fact that the tissues have been, quote, stretched out. In fact, it's really important that your tissues maintain a pretty consistent level of tension, which is quite high throughout the body at all times. So why do we feel more stretched out? Why do we feel better after a little mobility routine? It's probably because we've increased blood flow and other circulation in the area, otherwise hydration on certain levels, especially when it comes to our connective tissues. That tends to make us feel a whole lot better. Okay, so we're going to release that twisted pigeon, and you're going to bring your feet flat again, this time hips width distance, arms by your sides, palms face down. And we're going to do 10 more bridge pose. So you'll push down onto your heels, you'll squeeze your glutes to help you lift up, extend your hips to your capacity, and then lower down. That was 10. And then this would be 9. Use your breath. 7. There's 6. Now it's really important here that you are using your glutes. Use the extensors of the hip. That is an essential part of the equation of finding a little bit more comfort in the front of the pelvis for. And if you're starting to feel a little burn, that's good. That burn means that we have started to trigger something within that muscle tissue, which tells it that we mean business. We're ready to work. 2 more. And when we give that signal to muscle tissue, it knows that maybe it's time to get stronger. Okay, so you're going to bring your butt all the way down again. This time you're going to send your left leg out long. Take your arms out wide, please, for now. And then the knee is soft. We're not going to go crazy here. Just bring that leg up comfortably. And then send it forward until it's at its heaviest. Hold. And release. Okay, we're going to lift that left leg up. I want to point out that you could potentially use your right foot quite a bit here. I would prefer that it's just there for stability, not overusing it, because you could sort of work your way out of actually using your hip flexors, which is not our intent. You release that foot all the way back down. Let's do 3 more like this. Hover in the heaviest spot. Release. Here's 2, all the way up. Hover forward at your heaviest spot. Release. Here's 1. 1. Bring that heel forward. Hover at your heaviest spot. Release. Reach your right arm overhead. Okay, this takes concentration. So, left leg just come up to its heaviest spot. Same with the right arm. And release. This is 4. Heaviest spot. And you'll be tempted. You'll say, I'll just go a little bit higher. 3. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't cheat yourself out of this. 2. Here's 1. I'd like for you to hold. Just hold if you can. And then use your hands to gather that left knee toward the chest. Feel free to hold the thigh if your knee is not so happy about all this flexion, okay? And then just use your hands to guide that knee side to side. The hips can rock too if you like. So we know that it takes a certain amount of consistency to truly build strength, right? We need those signals of muscles working to happen consistently enough that the body decides that it is actually going to use energy to build muscle, right? But part of strength is also what happens in your nervous system, right? New synapses, new connections, or maybe rerouting of existing connections to facilitate movement in ways that have not been common in the past. Again, that takes consistency. Okay, so the next time you've got that knee towards your chest, I'm going to have you hold it. Hold it tight. And then will you maybe just use one hand and see if your hip flexors can hold the leg in this short position. It's hard. It's really hard. Or maybe it'll be no hands and you're going to squeeze and oh my gosh, it's going to feel pretty intense. Walk your right foot over to the right, all the way to the edge of your mat. Cross your left ankle over. And then drop that figure 4 shape over to the right. If you can hold your ankle, I say do so because it's going to let you push your left hip back and down. It's going to give you a nice breath of air into the front of that left hip. So flexibility is very similar to strength. It does take a certain level of consistency. Changes do happen in the biological tissues. But for the most part, the changes happen in your brain. Flexibility really happens in your brain. So I'm going to give you 3 breaths just to breathe again into the front of that left hip. And breathe out of the left hip. Again, offering your kindest, most generous attention. Okay? And then we'll release this. You'll come back flat to your back with your 2 feet, standing about hips width distance. Remember when I said we need to be consistent? In other words, we need a certain amount of stimulus in order to create change anywhere, anyhow, in the body. And so in this case, for the bridge, it means a 3rd set. So the arms by your sides. You're going to push down with your feet, lift your butt, shrug your shoulders under you, lift up, squeeze, and then come back down. That was 10. And this is 9. Here's 8. And 7. Keep going. Use your breath. Even though it might be getting hard now, there's no reason that the breath has to struggle. Let's do 3 more. 2, 1. Good stuff. And then release. Bring your butt back down. Send both legs out long. Heels as wide as your mat. So if possible, heels are on the bare floor rather than on your mat. And if you just decided to do this in your bed, that's okay. You could just imagine the dimensions of a yoga mat. We'll keep the arms out of the way, either on the body or out to the sides. With your left leg long now, slide your right heel up the length of the right side of the mat. And then re-extend the right leg. Now slide your left heel up the long edge of the mat and then re-extend the leg. Good. Your hips will tilt. Nothing like the windshield wipers, but there will be a tilt. Right leg and then left leg. And why not turn the head as well? So when your hips are tilting to the right, your face turn right. Hips center, face center. Hips tilt left, face turns left. Let's do 1 more of each, right and left. You might notice that you're feeling your core get involved, your spine. That's because really to flex the hip is a full body process, okay? And then I'm going to have you slide your right heel up 1 more time, but this time sneak that right foot into the center of your mat once it reaches the upper part of the mat. And then slide your left heel up and then bring the sole of the left foot against the sole of the right foot. A little intense at first, but maybe just take a breath. Give the benevolence of your attention. And then if it's still a little bit too much, take your fists, lift up those knees, and then just tuck your fists right where your hip meets your thigh. And that can give a lot of relief, at least for a few breaths. So to truly find comfort in that pelvis, what we're really looking for is not just flexibility, it's overall mobility. Because I think what my students and my clients who are having issues here are really after is that they want to move better. They want to feel more comfortable doing what they need to do throughout the day. And to build mobility, we need a combination of strength and flexibility, which requires consistency and attention. Let's just take 1 more breath in our spine butterfly. And then you'll release both legs out long. Once again, not as wide this time, unless that's your preferred position. Toes are turned out to the sides. Bring your palms just to the front of your pelvis or your hip creases. Breathe into those hands. Breathe out from that area. 1 more just like that. Well, thank you so much for taking time for this morning mobility routine.